Hey guys, Kelade here. So patch 8.3 is going to be out in a few hours. So let's kind of chat about, warriors in general and how we are and where we are right now in the patch, right? So first off, for warriors in general, there's really not a warrior change. Prot, arms, fury, there is actually zero changes. When you look at the class changes, it doesn't exist. Now the only thing I think it's like prot warriors can't thunderclap while they're pacified anymore. It's just a bug fix. That's the only thing. The biggest thing that's happening to us is the corruption changes, right? And being Fury Warriors, we're going to get the most benefit from all DPS because Fury Warriors have the highest amount of HP. So that just means since all of these stuff skills off of your HP, we're going to do the most damage every time it triggers, right? So from a DPS perspective, we're going to be very, very strong. Obviously, if you're any of the tank specs, you can actually even do more with some of the stuff because you just have much more max HP. So technically, some of the corruption stuff might buff tanks even more, but for DPS, they should be really, really good for Fury. Now, the biggest quote-unquote nerf would be any classes that use Guardian of Azeroth, right? So instead of, giving you 5% damage increase on the miner, it now only gives you 3%. And the Guardian casts a little bit slower, but it's still pretty strong of an essence. Once we get all the essences in Sims and, once the patch actually comes out, I'll let you guys know what the best essence is. But for now, you can definitely still use Condensed Life Force, a single target if you want. The AoE stuff's the same. Once you start getting a new one, you can start using them. But as far as for these three right here, right now for like your solo DPS, like what you can do, Breath of the Dying seems to be the best. It just does damage. It's kind of like the miner. It's basically kind of like Crucible of Flame. You can just kind of ignore it. It just does damage. And of course, right now, earlier on in the patch, any way of reducing corruption is going to be a really, really good thing. And we'll get to that basically right now. So corruption, as far as for what I can test right now on the PTR that's actually working, it's going to be the corruption that's on this belt right here, the Echoing Void. So I have the rank 3 version. There's 3 ranks. One does 1% of your health and damage, one does 1.5, and the rank 3 does 2.5. And as you get higher and higher, the corruption on it scales up, right? So the rank 3 right now gives you 60 corruption, but it does 2.5% of your health as damage. Now, the reason why this one is so good is one, it works on the PTR. Two, is that it's just constantly proccing, right? So for example, I was just kind of hitting the dummy. Let's see, how long was this fight? 1 minute and 16 seconds, right? So it does the highest damage. It hit 47 times. In 1 minute and 16 seconds, it hit 47 times. Highest damage right now with the rank 3 version is doing higher than Rampage, right? So you get this the day one that you can get corruption, you're just pumping, right? Just take your damage, right? Add like 90% to it, there you go. Now as far as for what's simming the best, there's actually one that's stronger, but unfortunately right now it doesn't work on the PTR, at least not for my warrior, right? I think it might work for casters, but there's some way with how it's coded right now on the PTR, because it started off as like an intellect item, it's not working perfectly on here, right? So that's the other thing, is that yes, when corruption first introduced, especially like corruption that's on the gear, it was only on one item, but Blizzard has made it so basically any corruption in the game can be on any piece except for your trinkets and your azurite and your cloak, I guess, because your cloak is a legendary, right? And your necklace. So the only thing on the left side it'll work on is bracers, and then it won't work on your trinket. But anything else like your rings, shoes, pants, belt, gloves, weapons, bracers can all get corrupted with all the corruption that your class can actually use. And for us, is actually infinite stars. So I guess I can just go on the guy that actually has infinite scars, so you can see that it actually drops, right? It is possible for you to get this item. So right here we have our other warrior that we just copied over and bought items. And let's see, he has it on the weapon right there. So right there on the weapon, your spells and abilities have a chance to strike nearby enemy with an infinite star, dealing 62,000 blah 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 damage, increasing their damage taken from infinite stars by 25%, stacks up to 10 times. The thing is obviously crazy. If the fight isn't like 20 seconds long, the longer the fight goes, the more it's going to do, because it's going to be doing that, stacked up 10 times, right? And once it stacks to 10, it's just going to stay at 10. That's why it's so crazy right now. So right now, if you sim it, let's say for example on Blood Mallet, that's what it looks like, right? Infinite stars, that's how much DPS it's going to add to your DPS. I don't know exactly like what their base DPS here is, but we know what Echoing Void did, right? You can see on my character previously where it did 19% of my damage more on Rampage. Infinite stars is basically double that. So, would have done maybe like 40% something of my damage. So it seems pretty strong right now. Now, you might say Blizzard will nerf this. I don't doubt they nerf Infinite Stars, but I will say, however, right now, my character with, 60 or 75 corruption, it's actually very, very annoying to play with. And you guys will see this as you get your own corruption gear. With the current state of corruption and how basically if you get a rank 3 on One Piece, you have so much corruption, right? There's right now with the 75 or 60, you have 4 different types of corruption. On top of that, the worst one that I think is the bad one is the Eye of the Corruption. The reason why the Eye of Corruption is so bad is that as you're getting damaged by the Eye, you're basically constantly taking a debuff that increases the damage you take from the Eye. Now, just getting one eye isn't a big deal, but you can actually spawn multiple eyes at the same time, and they can all tick on you. On top of that, you can have an eye spawn, and then before your debuff fades away, another eye spawns on top of you, which chains your stacks together, and you're basically dead. Now, obviously, you can move around and try to get out of it, but it is very, very annoying of a mechanic to have, and it comes up at 20 corruption. So, I mean, you basically put a gear on, and you're going to get it. So there is a big trade-off for a lot of the damage, which is why I'm kind of okay with some of them doing this much damage. Now, as far as for the other stuff that does damage, basically anything that does damage, if that makes sense. The traits, like these traits ones that just give you like stats, they don't do as well as this. And I don't think they'll scale as well either, right? Because think about, your starting HP, right? So my current character, let's say, 394,000 HP. By the end of the expansion, I'm gonna have way more HP, right? Maybe 450, maybe 500, probably 450 is probably closer. But at that point, all the stuff that scales off of HP is gonna do much better. Whereas something that's just gonna give me a little bit of mastery, like who really cares, right? Especially as you get more geared, the secondary stats, it's not scaling up. Where all these ones, the fact that I can basically, let's say, have this stars thing, and I put on, let's say, a different pants, and that'll improve the stars damage, that's pretty insane, right? So that's why I think the damage ones are so good. Not only are they strong right now, but they're only going to get even better. But I wouldn't be surprised if they do nerf Infinite Stars though, because right now it's insane for everybody. Oh, the other thing I did want to talk about is that Echoing Void is that it does split damage, and you might see that in the patch notes that it now splits damage, but it doesn't just work that way. So for example, let me see. So on Grong, right, he drops the trinket, wrong spec, for Grong's permanent range, right? This one, when you do damage to one target, it does all the damage. But if there's additional targets, it's gonna split the damage. But the damage does increase overall when you do hit more targets. That's basically how the Echoing Void works, is that it does split damage, but once you hit more than one target, the damage also increases. I don't know exactly how much it increases by, but it's basically like the way Grongs work. And I think that's kind of where Blizzard probably wants to go with a lot of like these AoE things, just so you can't go crazy by, pulling 30 mobs and you do that same ability that AoE is the same regardless of like 1 or 30. So I can see how they're slowly shifting towards this style AoE where there's almost like a soft cap in how much you can AoE, right? The damage is split, but they do give you a little bit more damage by, increasing the overall damage as you hit more targets. So it's still very good. Even for AoE, it's still very strong, right? Even if you compare it to the other two stuff like Twilight Devastation, which was really good, and they buffed this, but then they nerfed it again. So before, it basically used to do, 2%, 4%, 6%. Then they tripled the amount of damage it does to 6%, 12%, and 18%. They cut the procs by half. So it actually, when I first tested it, it basically procs 6 times per minute. So every 10 seconds, just like kept shooting beams out. And then they nerfed it by half. So then it kept shooting beams out like, 20 seconds, which isn't that bad because they buffed the damage by 3 times and they nerfed the proc rate by half. But it seems then afterwards, they also did a hidden nerf, which they didn't talk about. It doesn't seem, where the proc rate now is even worse. Now the proc rate is like 3 procs like every 2 minutes. It basically never procs anymore, especially from the first iteration. So I can see why it's so low down here, because even when I do test it, it barely does more than, the pants that I have from Crucible of Storms, right? So it really feels bad. Like you barely notice it now. And then of course this one, the Obsidian Skin, doesn't even seem like it's working on Sim, so it doesn't really do that much more anyways. So it's okay to use, but it's not going to be crazy like the top two. And then the Twisted Appendage, this one is actually a safe one to get. This is the one that just mind flays everything. I don't see this one getting nerfed, right? Potentially, I can definitely understand Infinite Stars getting nerfed. I can kind of understand Echoing Void getting nerfed. I mean, it's kind of hilarious that it becomes your highest damage in your whole kit. But Twisted Appendage is like, it's good enough, but it's not so OP that it gets nerfed. So potentially down the line, if they just completely gut the top two, you know, possible there. And then, you know, we already talked about Twilight Devastation, and then you have a bunch of like stat ones. Now, I didn't test every single stat one, but generally what I found is that sometimes it almost feels like the shorter duration ones felt better, because even though this only lasts 4 seconds, you get a much more amount of haze, and it generally procs more to where the uptime of this 4-second was very close to something like this that had an uptime of 10 seconds. And then it's just kind of like, well, if the uptime is basically the same, this one's gonna give you more stats than that, right? So it kind of is different there. And take everything, especially for Sims right now, with a grain of salt, because obviously people are still working on all the Sim stuff. But that's just kind of what I found testing on the PTR for a few days, is that everything that does damage actually does damage. Stat ways, kind of meh. And initially, I don't really see you wearing more than 2 pieces of corruption right now, because it definitely does do a lot of damage if you level your cloak very quickly. And then if you can put on the new essence that reduces your corruption by 10, I can see that kind of working out to where maybe you can even put on a 3rd corruption piece. But just FYI, if you have 3 corruption pieces on, you are going to take a lot of damage basically all the time. You're going to be slowed all the time, and it's going to make it much harder to actually do raid mechanics. So just watch out for that, right? There's potentially a lot of damage out there if you put on the corruption gear, but you guys will definitely see when you first put on all those pieces how annoying it can be to get used to all of that. I feel like for corruption wise, the items themselves feel better for melee, like the beneficial effects, but the negative effects feel worse for melee. So there's that, right? So for example, like Echoing Void, it does damage around you. So, I mean, you basically wear this if you're melee. I'm not really sure how you wear this if you're range, because it's nearby enemies. I don't really know the range, but I assume if you're range, you don't use this. For melee, problem is, if you spawn Eye of Corruption on like an ad, and the ad can't move, you either don't hit the ad or you have to be in the zone. It's a relatively big zone, whereas, you know, if you're ranged, you spawn the zone, you can just come over here. For example, like you can actually even just proc it by charging it, which is sometimes really nice. So like sometimes you'll charge and the zone will be proc back there, and then you don't have to worry about it. But generally, let's say if I stand on the middle of this guy and I eventually proc it, oh yeah, don't worry about the thing from the beyond, that doesn't do shit. So look how big the eye is. Look how big I have to walk away from the target to get out of the zone. I mean, you literally have to be out of melee, right? So it's a pretty feels bad. I mean, for the first one, you just take it and then just hope you don't get a second one, because if you get stacked up second one, you're definitely getting out of melee or you're dead. You're probably using it in range regen too, just so you're not insta dead. So FYI, you can actually take some damage from these. But yeah, that's kind of my quick summary on corruption so far. I mean, we'll have more updated stuff like the gear guide as we get through the week, you know, as we get closer to raid. Once everything in Sims seems to be more, you know, balanced out, and then there isn't any funky business, we'll let you guys know, you know, what obviously the best gear is, corruption, essences, all of that in the upcoming week. And as always, thanks for checking out the video, guys. Feel free to subscribe to see more. See ya.